Hi, everyone.
Hi, Anjali.
Happy Tuesday.
Good afternoon. I'm Yomika Bennett, Executive Director of the New York Charter Schools Association. Welcome to our weekly Tuesday webinar. We'll start today with some brief updates before we introduce our panelists. First, I want everyone to mark their calendars for a deep dive webinar this Thursday at 4 p.m., which we will focus on the Board of Regents and an overview. I also want to remind everyone to spread the word on the 2020 census. Last week we had a great virtual census event. Reminder everyone, $675 billion is at stake. An accurate census count determines funding for programs such as Title I and school lunch programs. So please visit our website, newyorkcharters.net/advocacy, to learn more about how to make sure we are counted, we get our fair share. Like I said, we had a great event last week with elected officials, and I want to give a special shout out and thanks to our partners for that. Please check out the link, get counted, get our dollars. Let's do this, right? I also want to update on the division of budget, the plan regarding the cuts that was due, we expected on the 15th, which was last Friday. The plan was due to be given to the legislature on that date. That did not happen, as you all know. We're still waiting for that plan. There is no specific date yet. I've heard, quote, end of the month, so we'll see what that turns out to be. It appears that the state is looking to see right now what the federal government will do. So all eyes are on the feds and how much funding they'll provide and whether they will provide. There's some promising news on that front. The HEROES Act, which is a federal bill that was drafted and passed by the House, provides $3 trillion in emergency aid, including funding for state and local governments. The Senate, however, is likely to make changes to that bill or introduce their own bill, but at least there is some action on the federal level for funding for the states. In the meantime, we have a short reprieve from DOB when they must act on that the cuts, so we need to get our push in there for federal funding. We need to go out there and advocate. If you haven't already, please visit the website www.fundsnyschools.com to push for federal funding. Thank you to our partner Charter Center for this, where we have joined together to provide some tools to advocate for more funding. Check out the site. Let's get those dollars in. To date, we have had almost 2,000 letters have been sent. We have 600 people signed up to be counted as advocating for that. Let's keep up the momentum. Let's keep fighting to bring the dollars to New York. And that's my brief housekeeping for today. Welcome, everyone. For today's discussion, I am joined by Susie Carello, Executive Director of the SUNY Charter Schools Institute, David Frank, Executive Director of the Charter Schools Office at NYSID, Angeli Matos, Executive Director, Policy and Operations at New York City Department of Education, and Aaron Cochran, Managing Director in the same office, Corey Callahan from the New York City Charter Center, and Randall Eiserman, also from the New York City Charter Center. Welcome. So David, Susan, and Aaron, I will start with you. Thank you for letting me take a minute to share that update. I'm sure that right now you have an update for us, and I'm going to pass it over to David. Welcome.
Well, thank you, Yomika. It's great to be back here again with all of you. We're working hard to get out the 2020-2021 tuition numbers for all of you. It should be out either later today or first thing tomorrow. Sorry for any delay on that. So that's very exciting. We're so happy that probably 98% of your schools have filled out the survey that both ourselves and SUNY and the New York City DOE partnered with Credo on. So we're very excited to take a deep dive into that data. Susie, I'm not sure if you want to talk about next steps, but I'd be happy to as well. And then we are also, I can. So then, so what we're doing now is we're working with our partners at Credo to analyze the data. Because we're doing all this on a shoestring, it's going to take 3 to 4 weeks for them to do so, for them to analyze it, to clean up the data. Then they'll be doing some quality assurance checks. We'll probably have conversations with other authorizers in the field sometime during the summer. And we're looking to really pull out what works, what doesn't work for you going into the next academic year. And just as a reminder, we're not publishing any specific schools information. These are really conversations that we want to have with you around improving your own practice, giving information to schools so that you see your data. This is not for accountability purposes. This is really just educators coming together with educators to help tell your story. So we just want to be very, very clear about that. We're also on an authorizing front. We're really excited to continue our visits with schools remotely. Actually, I was very happy that I could spend the morning with my friends at the Bronx Charter School for the Arts, and I got to see some great instruction this morning in their elementary and middle school. So thank you, Miriam, for helping to set that up. And we're all the liaisons at SCD are continuing to do that. So that's my report out for this week.
All right, great, thank you. Susie, do you have an update?
Just real fast to echo the thanks from David. A couple of you we reached out to because there was not a clear picture of who was answering for multiple schools, and we are navigating that. My apologies if we caused added distress, but thanks to all of you for contributing to that. And this week is another set of phone kind of conversations with the Institute team. So if you're a SUNY authorized school, thank you very much for that work. We also, shout out to City Arts has invited us, the Institute team, and if it's, invited to everybody, I'll leave them up to that, to kind of put that in the chat. But they're going ahead with their Footloose musical on Friday. So we are real fired up to be popping in at the Institute and practicing our, 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon dancing. So looking forward to that. Had a great conversation with the folks at Cat Prep today. Thank you. They are just, I can't explain to you how nourishing it is for us to be gathering this information so that we can tell all of the things you were able to accomplish during this time. We also, just my regular plea for, please do be reaching out to the Institute. Many of you are talking to me about the multiple scenario planning that you're doing for the summer, for next year, as we don't have any stakes in the ground about bricks and mortar school versus blended learning. We're again, trying to be as useful and helpful to all of you as we can. So please do keep reaching out. That's my update.
Great, thank you. Great location, by the way. Erin, do you have an update?
Yeah, just a quick one. We just want to thank all of our schools that took the survey. We know that there's a lot going on right now, and we just appreciate the effort, and we're very excited to look at the data.
All right, good. We'll jump in right to our first question then. David, first one is for you. SCD recently released an update to teacher certification requirements. Can you give an overview of what these are and how they apply to charter schools?
Yeah, thanks, Yumika. So very briefly, as we passed around to all schools, there's now a new emergency COVID-19 certificate Basically, this is a one-year emergency certificate that allows teaching candidates to continue to work while taking and passing the required teacher certification exams. There's a lot of specifics in there, who's eligible, who's not eligible. I actually, for those of you who know, the New York City Charter School Center actually has developed a great FAQ on this. And I won't get into the nitty gritty, but rest assured that Randall Eiserman and Carol Cohn over at the Charter Center have this covered. And Randall, actually, I connected before, and Randall is going to provide you with the link so that you can actually see the synopsis that they've put together. But SED wants to make sure that teachers are not out of compliance with the teacher certification requirements. And so we do encourage your teachers to apply for the COVID-19 certificate if they're going to fall short of meeting all of the requirements for their certificate. There's also some extensions for certain certificates that are expiring at the end of the summer, and they're granted a 6-month extension, and that's for the conditional initial certificate that normally you'd apply for the professional if once you have certain exam requirements completed. And then for those teachers who maybe were planning on taking the EdTPA and need to provide videotape of remote instruction, the EdTPA safety net is actually going to be extended so that if you want, in lieu of taking the EdTPA rather, you can take and pass the assessment called ATS, which is the Assessment of Teaching Skills exam, which is an old exam, but now that's been extended as well. We'd be happy to talk to anyone about the specifics, but check out the link that Randall provided, and it gives you all the gory details.
All right, great, thanks. Another question, and this is for all three of David, Susie, and Aaron. Aaron, though, we're going to start with you because the question is, for co-located schools in New York City, a major question is about how to set their 2021 calendar in light of questions about when they will be able to access their buildings. Can you each speak to the topic of calendar creation, whether it's related to this consideration or others? And Aaron, like I said, we'll start with you.
Sure, and this is a great question, and we really understand the concern. We are still talking internally with our leadership to develop this guidance, so no specific guidance right now.
Okay, well, David?
I think, like Aaron said, we don't know what the New York City DOE calendar is going to be next year. I would encourage schools, just like you have, we've encouraged you to create multiple budgets, we'd encourage you to create multiple calendars. One that is, if we're starting a normal academic year, one if you have to start the academic year providing remote instruction, and one where there's a hybrid. Now, I can't give you any specifics because I don't have them, but you might want to just start thinking about what some of these scenarios look like, and have engage your stakeholders to make sure that you're meeting their needs as well. So we'd encourage you not only to keep your teachers in the loop, but also to talk to parents, as well as your district if you're in co-located space or your landlord. But we think that over-preparing and thinking what the worst case scenario, the middle scenario, and the best case scenario won't steer you wrong.
Great, thank you. And that sounds like advice that would apply across the state. Am I right about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's only one charter school outside of New York City that's in co-located space. I think it's Westminster Charter School in Buffalo, but everyone else is in private space. And so you don't have to work with your district so much, but certainly we don't know when school will be cleared to commence instruction by the governor. And so I would encourage you to plan for all eventualities, or at least maybe pick 3 or 4 eventualities, and partner with your stakeholders. Talk to parents, talk to teachers, keep them in the loop, and I bet that if they know that you're being thoughtful about this, it'll bring a lot of peace of mind to them.
Great, thank you. Susie?
I would encourage everybody to do as my colleagues have suggested. And again, you know, if the exact thing emerges that is not what you planned for, there will be an ability to pivot. So right, we have office space. For those of you that don't know, some of you have been to our office space in New York City that's in the SUNY Optometry building, which is actually a working hospital that is still open and has people going in. So we have some scenarios considering that particular team, all of the issues associated with that place. We also have office space in Albany that we share. It's in an office building that we share with other folks. And so we are doing kind of multiple scenario planning with regard to getting back what's available. I'm happy to commiserate with each of you about how challenging the multiple scenario planning is, but we've begun some really robust conversations on the team, both about, you know, what we understand will be happening and what is unclear about what will be happening. I would just say that if you are co-located in a New York City DOE school, and their decision-making process ends up, again, not to align exactly with what it is you have optimally planned and potentially talked about with us, we will work with that for flexibilities for you during the coming year.
Yamika, if I could just jump in here quickly, I think one other thing that I would encourage people to think about aside from co-location is transportation. And so I know that, and Erin, maybe if I could ask you to speak briefly to the feedback and guidance that DOE is contemplating around access to transportation for days in advance of a district start. But for non-New York City schools, my personal recommendation is reach out now to your transportation provider. I think it's a mix outside of New York City, whether or not those contracts for the days in advance of the district start actually flow through the district versus our direct contracts between the charter and the transportation company. But my guess is that regardless, transportation companies will be waiting for guidance from departments of health and from the governor's office. And so even if you are not in co-located space, your students' ability to ride transportation to school, I think is an open question and something that's worth starting conversations around now.
All right, great, thank you, Anna. Does anybody want to add to that before I go into the next question? Okay, on to the next. So we got this question earlier today, and it's regarding year-end assessments. The Board of Regents put out guidance and recommendations a few weeks ago for year-end assessments ranging from one-on-one check-ins with teachers to actual standardized assessments given remotely. For each of you, what are your thoughts and guidance on this issue, as many schools need to make a decision soon? So actually, I'm going to start with you, David, and see if Susie and Erin have any comments after that.
Yeah, so I just think it's good, it's sound educational practice that you want to make sure that your students are leaving the academic year knowing what they've accomplished and what they still need to work on. And then your teachers know what they need to focus on, whether it's during summer school, additional intervention programs, or at the beginning of next academic year. We know how thoughtful so many charter schools now are being about remote instruction. And I would think that you would want to be able to convey to your board, to your, if you receive philanthropic funding, to your philanthropic funders, to so your authorizer, the work that you've been doing throughout these strange times. So we would strongly encourage it. That's why we put out the guidance. It doesn't have to look the same for every school. We would encourage you to think about what best fits in with the narrative of your own charter, what meets the needs of your teachers, and what will help you continue to work towards proficiency and college and career readiness for all students.
Okay, great, thank you. Susie, do you want to add anything?
I sure will. We know that many of you give interim assessments regularly throughout the year, and those are another good way to determine where your students stand with regard to the skills, knowledge, and abilities you're looking for them to have as they advance into next year. They are also data that we are going to welcome with open arms. Reporting. We know that a number of organizations give Fountas and Pinnell or other assessments for students that may not be exactly the IAs that you've always thought about. But again, if that is data that you are using to indicate the progress and accomplishments of your students for this year, that's great. We are still focused on, as I always say, we really like reading, writing, math, science, and the arts. Like, we really like it, and history and all of those content areas. And we understand that we all lost a ruler in terms of how students are progressing this year when we think about state assessments and end of course assessments. So the data that you have, I know you're focused on making sure that kids are meeting all of the academic accomplishments they need to meet to succeed at the next level. So as you are defining that, we are open to, again, talking to you about what others are doing. I know that the center and others have some focus groups around these things. Maybe that could be one of the Thursday webinars to have some of the schools talk about how they are looking at end of year assessments and establishing where students are performing. We are not going to mandate anything, but ask you to wisely make sure that you've got an understanding of what the skills, abilities, and knowledge pieces are that your children will need at summer school, as David says, or at the start of next year.
All right, great. Thank you, Susie. And I would just say to everyone who's on the call, if you want to discuss that topic on a Thursday webinar, let us know through the chat that you're interested. We'll see if we can put that together. We need to know what we have for an audience for that. That's great. Thank you. Erin, to close out our last question before we head to the Q&A.
Sure. We definitely co-sign what David and Susie are saying. And we just, as I'm sure everyone's aware, keep in mind that any test-taking conditions that, you know, they may not be as ideal as you would make in your school. So just keeping that in mind as you're reviewing the results or maybe evaluating the level of stakes that should be aligned to these assessments. And then something that I hadn't thought about, but I have experienced it personally, reach out to any vendors or companies that you may be using for these IAs if you do have a vendor, because we actually had a challenge with my son trying to get one of these assessments administered where the vendor was pretty adamant that they did not want their product used for in-home testing. So if that's not something you've already been engaging with a vendor, we would recommend that you reach out just so that any timelines you have in mind are not disrupted.
Great, good point. Thank you. That's our last question. Anne, I'm going to turn it over to you for Q&A.
Great. And so anyone can weigh in. We have a few before we turn it over to DOE specific topics. But someone is asking that if a school was essentially in session because they had teachers working is the question, but I'm assuming that question implies providing instruction during what otherwise was considered to be the previously scheduled spring break. How would you consider that in terms of the context of a last day of school, a planned last day of school in June? Could schools close earlier for having provided what could be considered additional days of instruction?
Our standard for looking at any of this, and I would encourage all school standards regarding this, is one, is it of an educational benefit to students? And two, have you spoken to your stakeholders, which include parents and teachers, about this? And so parents might be expecting that you're going to be in session until the date that you promised them at the beginning of the school year. And then as an authorizer, my question to you would be, well, how are you going to support those parents and keep those kids learning until the date that you conveyed. And then also we know that as good as remote instruction can be, we know that some of it can be a little lacking for some students, and so we need more instruction, not less. And how would you work towards your goal of proficiency in college and career readiness for all students if you're shortening the school year? If you can answer both of those questions, it's something that we would consider. And I would recommend talking to your authorizer about that.
I'll jump in. Similarly to David, we know that students have lost so many steps, and that parents have, in many ways, welcomed once they settled into it, the ritual and routine of remote learning as a part of organizing their day. And so you want to, as you always do as leaders, tag with your school community. And I think the question comes about the instructional part of your school community, which I completely understand. I've had this conversation with a few leaders. We've bounced around some ideas about continuing to drive literacy, numeracy, other areas in a way that may look slightly different than 200 minutes of synchronistic learning every day, which I know some of you are doing. And that may include a wide variety of opportunities. So as David says, if you want to have a brainstorm with me, if you want to just talk about the pros and cons, or if you've got data from your school community that's a good option for your school community, I'm happy to talk about it.
Erin, any thoughts?
Nothing to add. I think Susie and David covered it.
Well, thank you. And I will just, as a parent, co-sign on that idea of relying on the school materials as a part of our new, quote unquote, new normal. And so one other thing that I will preview for folks, recognizing the incredible burden that schools have been carrying these past 10 weeks, we're putting together a compilation of some summer resources that are low cost or no cost to schools that they can choose to make available to families, so that it is not also on all of you and all of your teachers to continue to be that resource to your families. But I will say, as one, we do appreciate it, and even packets are better than what my kids will be doing without those packets. So, all right. So Stacy asks, will authorizers be asking for updated continuity plans?
I can talk a little bit about this because we've started to look at what's possible in terms of blended learning under the New York State Charter Schools Act, as well as when John King was commissioner. I think there were some regulations released. David, maybe you can talk about these in a minute, regarding blended learning, which is kind of part-time bricks and mortar, part-time online. I think they were targeted at high school students. We've taken a look at those and are navigating. This is why I keep, I'm asking everybody, do let me know what regulatory relief you are interested in having in addition to any relief from your charter contract, because we need to be able to navigate those as much ahead of time as possible. So with regard to understanding how that will roll out, we're trying to get a stake in the ground, a couple of stakes in the ground around, would remote learning next year be something that we would necessarily want to say is a good continuity of education plan? And if it's different from what you're doing now, what would we want to know? We're, us authorizers, we can always ask you to give us lots of information and plans and all that other business. We're trying to create a pretty clear, small list of where you perceive the changes are from your regular program, if you do blended learning or online learning next year, and what that'll look like. So I don't know if I'll call it an updated continuity of education plan. In some cases, they may be changes to charters, which we'll manage, and we're getting some guidance together about that, and would like to talk about it probably in a couple weeks.
All right, anyone else? All right, David, it looks like in the Q&A that you would like to speak to this question of clarity around equivalency for remote or virtual school. And I think just to clarify for folks, this is looking ahead beyond the end of this school year where the governor's executive orders have essentially suspended all requirements around seat time, days, hours, that sort of thing. But that right now there is not a provision in law that allows the sort of distance learning that anyone is doing to count towards those requirements in the future. And so a lot of contingency planning it will require clarity around that issue. So for example, if a school has diagnosed cases in its individual school, but there is not an executive order to close schools broadly, the necessity for distance learning to count as regular school as an oversimplification. So David, would you like to speak to that in more specific terms and as opposed to my oversimplification?
Yeah, and I think my answer sort of echoes what Susie just said, that we really want to hear from schools what they need in order to be nimble and best serve students. We've learned so much during the pandemic, and we would hate to lose all of that. And so hearing from you that there needs to be some flexibility around seat time requirements. I mean, these are things that I think all of our overage undercredited high schools knew already. And so it's really important for you to continue those conversations with us, but also there are other stakeholders, whether they're in the governor's office or your local legislators, where you should convey to them the importance of this as well. So that's definitely something that we're going to be thinking about at the State Ed Department. But I would say we really don't have information. We don't have more information about specifics, but we'll certainly be working on them over the next weeks and months. But very important to keep in communication with us. One thing that I would strongly caution against are trying to be cute with certain existing regulations or requirements around things like homeschooling. I think that what we'll probably see is if schools are trying to circumvent existing laws or regulations around seat time requirements, then school districts, including the New York City DOE, will use the power that they have, and SED will back them up, to ensure that the per pupil funding is appropriately being allocated. And so I would just strongly caution against trying to equate flexibilities around seat time requirements with charter schools becoming meccas for homeschooling. We would hate to lose the narrative and momentum that we've developed over the past 20 plus years in charter schools here in New York State that were not like the Wild West that exists in some states, like Ohio, Michigan, parts of Michigan, I should say. My colleagues
just name names, David. Name names.
Yeah, it wouldn't be happy with me, and they're a great authorizer. But nothing like the largest university-based authorizer in the country, SUNY, which is a gold standard, of course. But I would caution to stay very far away from that. From an advocacy point of view, and I'm not an advocate, I'm glad to be in the presence of advocates, but I think it would muddle the waters quite a lot. And so I would just strongly be against that.
Thank you for that, David. So then final question, what, if any, of the outcomes of the survey that you all have collected from schools will be shared even back to the sector in this perspective of sort of shared learning?
That's a great question. So these, we've talked about this for a month or so. These were questions largely, there probably were questions in the survey that were more David's idea or more Aaron's idea, but these were questions largely that we understood as authorizers. We all wanted to know about our individual schools or multi-school ed corps. So to the extent that there is an analysis that is sector-wide, because I'm not going to see David's schools data, and I'm not going to see Aaron's schools data, and they're not going to see our schools data. So to the extent that there is a sector-wide analysis of this, that would be something that Credo might do. As David suggested, we're all doing this on a shoestring, including Credo, so big thanks to them. So I would say stay tuned. Maybe it's something, Anna, that the three authorizers could get together once we look at the kind of big picture learnings across our three sets of schools and kind of could talk about it and compare it that way. I'd be happy to do that part of it.
Great. David, Aaron, any thoughts?
No additional thoughts.
Yeah, nothing else to add.
Great. I do see some additional questions in the Q&A. I am not trying to ignore those questions, but I do want to hand this over to the DOE specific topics. And I am only not picking up the additional questions in the Q&A because there are not specific answers to those yet. And so we'll continue to convene here on Tuesdays as we get additional answers, in particular around some of these regulation considerations that people are concerned about in terms of things like counting days and remote attendance and all of those sorts of things. So with that, I will hand it over to Corey and Aaron for some New York City DOE specific updates.
Thanks, Anna. Good afternoon, everyone. Corey's here. I missed you guys last week, and also I'll be asking Anjali a couple questions. But before I move, I just wanted to give Randall, our co-panelist today, an opportunity to speak about a couple of the programs that are coming up that address some of the issues that I think have been raised here.
So we're really happy, in addition to the great things that Mexico is doing on Thursday, on this coming Wednesday, there is a forum, a seminar on the data protection that all schools should be prepared to do to safeguard student data. We know that this is something that SED feels strongly about, and we will post the link for it. We have invited Sarah Richmond, Bond Schoenig King. Did I get that right, Corey?
You did.
Good.
Bond Schoenig and King.
Thank you, to make sure that we have some real expertise. They've done a lot of work on this. So watch for that link. We also, next week, are looking forward to a forum discussion with our Collaborative for Inclusive Education, hosted by Melissa Katz, Director, and Jen Rodriguez, the Specialist for Special Education. And it's all about special ed supports in the current environment. So stay tuned. We'll post those links and look forward to seeing you with us there. Take it away, Corey.
Great. Thanks, Randall. Hi, Anjali. I was going to start, it's on top of mind as the announcement came out this afternoon about summer school. And there's lots of questions in the chat box. So with the recent announcement of summer school being virtual in DOE, I'll ask the first question of if you have any thoughts you just want to share about that, and you can anticipate that people want to know how that impacts charters in a multitude of ways.
Hi, Corey, and hi, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well. Happy Tuesday. I'm going to get it together soon and come on here and video too. Okay, so the first thing I want to share, Corey, and I see this question in the chat, is will charter schools have access to the remote summer school program that DOE will be managing? I am not sure is the quick answer. I have raised this question with our leadership and hope to have an update soon. Regarding access to DOE buildings, that is another big and outstanding question. So more to come on that as well.
How about if there's no in-person summer school, will rec centers be open?
Yes, so that was announced earlier. So the rec centers will continue to operate throughout the summer. We will keep you updated if, you know, there may be some changes of locations, and we'll keep you posted.
Okay. And then the other issue would be the school food, the grab and go meals.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's also to be determined, Corey. So more to come on that.
So in addition to issues about building access in the summer, we're still getting questions about the procedure for building access. And I'm going to ask you to deal with it in two parts, because I know there's been some announcements in Charter Weekly. But if you could start with what is the process right now, generally speaking, that I know has been in Charter Weekly. And then the follow-up is, what is going to be the process for schools that are needing access to their buildings to close out for the school year?
Mm-hmm. Yes. So thank you for that question. So we issued guidance in the C Weekly about 2 weeks ago. So please go back and review that guidance. I will go through it at a super high level now for your first question, Corey. So there's a form, a Google Access form. I just put it in the chat that schools have to submit in order to request access. And so please note that you have to request access 48 hours in advance and 96 hours in advance if your school is co-located with the rec center. The custodians and the building, the borough safety directors are reviewing these requests and approving or denying these requests accordingly. And they're moving super fast. We're getting a lot of requests on a daily basis, and they're moving fast. If there's ever a time where you don't hear back quickly from our BSDs, shoot us an email and we can support. I do want to clarify one thing as well, Corey. So this building access is meant for, there's a list of activities that is listed in the guidance. You can go and review that in detail, but at a super high level, this is meant to be a grab and go of things, right? So if you want to pick up mail, if you need to certify mail, if you need to, pick up materials to support your remote learning, things like that. This is not meant for like classroom closeout or furniture pickup. There's a school that wanted to pick up tables. Like, your request will be denied if these are the type of things that you are that you want to do. Unfortunately, we recognize that there are some schools that want to close out the year, right? You want to clean out your classrooms. You may have to shift classrooms. There are a number of activities that we understand that schools need more access for, and we're working through that process internally. We want this to be a fair process, and we still have to abide by social distancing guidance, so we have to put a lot more thought on this. So more to come on that part of your question, Corey.
So just to clarify, you will be releasing guidance at some point, hopefully soon, as we are coming up on June, in terms of how schools can anticipate getting into their buildings to do these kind of closeout processes and or pick up materials that they need for the summer. That's right. Yep, that's correct. So the building access form, and sorry, I said a lot very quickly. The building request form that I put in the chat it's fill that out in the meantime for very low touch sort of things that you need from your building, from your classrooms, from your offices. I know a lot of people are getting, schools are getting or will be getting ready for their audits soon, so you can pick up those type of things. The more complicated sort of classroom closeout end of year type of tasks, we will be issuing more guidance for that specifically, hopefully soon, because we understand the urgency around that. So again, on the access to buildings in the summer and then into the fall, we are still getting questions about when the DOE calendar is going to be announced. Any update on that? I'm seeing a lot of questions still on what the date is.
Unfortunately, no, Corey. As you can imagine, this is a hot question internally. Yep. You will be the first one to know the minute is released.
Okay. And then in addition to the questions of what it will look like for the beginning of next year, I'm definitely seeing a lot of questions about nurses, but I know that we've also received questions about access to school food and Metro cards, which are all services that a lot of the DOE schools, whether co-located or not, depend on for operation. Is there any update you can provide on those issues?
No update on nurses. And here's what I'll say. I'll reiterate what I mentioned a few weeks ago. It's very, very unlikely that we're all going to go back to school at 100%, right, with all of our students. In the scenario that we go back, you know, for some percentage, right? Let's say 30% or 20% of students from each school. We understand that folks are going to be even more invested than before to have nurses available. So we have, even before we transition to remote learning, we're working very closely with DOH to place nurses in every single school. And we do open next year with any scenario, right? With any scenario that had students in a physical building. I would imagine that we will continue with our efforts to place to place a nurse in every school. Regarding transportation or Metro cards rather, we are moving ahead as we shared before with our planning for early Metro cards and with our planning for transportation, all with a big caveat that a lot is in flux, and so we will keep you posted as we learn more information.
So moving on to some finance issues, you've spoken several times about the reconciliation that will happen in July. Do you have any updates on what schools can expect from you on this?
So not yet. So more to come on reconciliation. I can talk to payment cycle 1 though.
Okay, well, that was my next question. So I'll have you go there.
Awesome. So payment cycle 1, as you all know, is scheduled to open tomorrow at 9 a.m. and it's scheduled to close on Friday, the 29th. We may be a little bit delayed because we're still waiting for the per pupil rate to be released. And so we'll keep you posted. We're working closely with David and SED. We'll send a message either tonight or first thing tomorrow if the opening of the portal for the payment cycle 1 invoice submission will be delayed. We do also, Corey, we have a training session that is scheduled for tomorrow. It's tomorrow at 9 a.m. and from 9 to 11 a.m. Please register. We sent out a reminder link earlier today. I will not have any new answers there, right? This webinar is focused on getting you ready for payment cycle or payment cycle 1. We don't have any new answers on what the rate or what the process for next year will look like. But at the very minimum, we're going to take you through how to complete your invoice. And we're also going to be talking through some considerations that you should take given this crisis.
Okay, there's a couple of questions in chat that I will get to in a second, but just lastly on special education, any updates to any of the special ed policies that you want to let this group know about?
No updates yet. We are having office hours this Thursday at 3, so please join us there. We are you know, we're still working on the paraprofessional guidance, as I mentioned before, and it's taking quite a while to work that through. There's one thing, Corey, related to devices that I do want to announce. So as you remember, the device lending program is open to charter school students, and there's a update / clarification that we're going to be issuing on Thursday. Essentially, it's going to say that all students with IEPs in charter schools may apply for a device. And you know, you don't have to wait. You can tell your families now if you wish, but we will formally be announcing that on Thursday.
Great. Well, that is excellent news. So thank you. Some other questions. Is there any guidance on whether charter schools are going to need to enter a Regents exemption code for an individual student in ATS?
That's a great question. I am not sure, and we'll ask.
Questions about access to space. Question about, are we going to be able to have auditors? If building access is restricted to staff, will schools be allowed to have auditors in to complete field work for student records?
That is a good one, Corey. Okay. That's interesting. I'm going to take that back, Corey. I'll come back with that next week.
And then the other one kind of related is the building appointment form for non-leadership staff. So are principals and DOOs still allowed to come in for immediate entry and exit? And I think this is something, Anjali, we've talked with you about, as you know, there are multiple levels of people in charters as they have to run their own nonprofit that need access to the building, unlike in a DOE structure where it might just be the principal.
Corey, I want to make sure that I understand your question. So for initially, before we issued this guidance for building access, it was limited to leadership, like, you know, principal, etc. Right now, this, you know, the updated guidelines, anyone in your school may request access. And of course, we're asking, you know, principals and operations leaders to lead, to be points, right? Because we don't want everyone to ask for access at once, etc. But Corey, is your question like, can an CSBM person request access?
No, can it be a non-leadership level person?
Non-leadership, yes. It could be your ops person. It could be your teacher leader. It could be, you know, whoever you decide. I think, again, the thing that we're reiterating is that the leadership, so your principal operations leaders, that they're coordinating this access, right? Because we don't want it to be.
Do you want them filling out the form, or can the ops level person fill out the form themselves?
The ops level person can fill out the form. Yep.
Okay. For related services, students in New York City DOE in charter schools, will the DOE contracted agency providers be providing these services into the summer?
That is to be determined.
I think I caught all of them. There were a lot. Anything else you want to add, Anjali?
Nothing else to add. Thank you, Corey, and thank you, everyone. Thank you for your patience. There are a lot of questions that are still outstanding, and we're working really hard to get answers as soon as we can.
Great. And I am seeing a request for the link to register for the per pupil training tomorrow. I don't know if Erin or Anjali, you can post that really quickly.
Yeah, I actually just shared it in the chat. It's a super long link, so my apologies.
Okay, I see it. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. All right. Well, thank you very much. I'll turn it back over to you, Yumika.
All right, thank you. I think that wraps up today's webinar for the week. I will give everybody, as I always do, the opportunity to give a parting words. Susie, David, anything you'd like to say before we wrap up?
Can I circle back around? I really appreciated Thursday's webinar, and as some of you have said to me, which is lovely to hear, it's nice to hear and see the authorizers and the associations and everybody that cares about lifting up our really super strong leaders in the field at the schools. Working the webinar on Thursday was great because there were so people from like different sectors working together, charter sector, different levels of politicians, and of course the folks talking about the census. And I really appreciated that webinar. And I really appreciated earlier, there was a potential notion of, and I think there was something suggested in the chat, of additional contents for the Thursday content focused webinar. And so if SUNY can contribute, please do let me know. But it's been really instructive and helpful too. So thank you to everybody that's contributed to making this happen.
All right, thank you very much, Susie.
I would just close with, to go back to the question about seat time regulations before. Like we don't have all the answers. That's why we have these calls and these conversations. So I look forward to continuing to have conversations with you, to letting us know what regulatory relief you need. The more information you have, the better. Even potential language for regulation is not unwelcome. We have a million things that we're all doing, but if ultimately all of you are the content experts, and so we appreciate that partnership. I think we continue to ask for your good graces in us not having answers to all these questions, and for there being so many unknowns. We're glad that you guys get up every day and cobble together an educational program for our kids.
All right, great. Erin, any parting words?
No, nothing else. Just want to shout out everyone working so hard. And we look forward to talking to you next week.
All right, great. Thank you, everyone. Shout out, Susie. Thank you for the shout out to the census event. Thank you to all the partners who helped make that magic happen. Thank you to all to listen in on Tuesdays and Thursdays with us. We thank you. We appreciate you. Send us your recommendations for webinars. We appreciate them, and everyone, we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.